Wrapping up the 420 weekend, we had our third SLS stop come to its close, and it seems the Californians in the audience weren't the only ones burnt out on too much green, as we saw with the two most skilled SLS skaters, Najee Houston and Yuta Horigome, unfortunately not landing enough single tricks to make it past the semis. Whether from too many dispensary stops or future Coachella plans, it left a less familiar group of faces in the men's final as compared to the women's. Given the ruling format of this year's SLS stop, a maximum of 4 scores will be kept, with only 1 allowed to be from the line section, placing a much heavier importance on single trick selection, being that you have 5 tries for your best possible trick, as earning 4 high scores in this half of the contest can wipe out any low scoring line, which we actually see with Yumika Oda, Felipe Gustavo, and Braden Hoban all landing higher scoring single tricks to replace those pesky line scores that were weighing them down. Whereas some skaters like Momiji Nishida and Gustavo Ribeiro scored some of the highest lines of the night, they were both unable to secure more than 2 scores in the single trick section, making their hard effort in the 45-second line section in the finals kind of a waste, unfortunately. In fact, as we look at the men's side for semifinals, it appears that only 1 skater of the top 6 finalists even needed their line score to make it to the finals at all, with the rest of the 5 skaters relying entirely on their 4 best single tricks to take them to the next round, all of which were above an 8.7 to say the least. Once again, highlighting just how crucial this single trick section can be to an entire event in SLS. Being that this contest has become somewhat of a best trick event, Haisa Leal took the advantage of being the only skater in the women's final to land 4 single tricks, giving her not only the win, but the highest total score in general for the women's side, all with only 1 bail amongst her 19 landed tricks and a 95% overall landing accuracy. However, this was not the highest overall landing rate of the night, as we saw with Giovanni Viana and Liz Akama both landing 20 tricks with only 1 bail in their single section, giving each of them a 95.2 landing rate that just sadly wasn't carried over into the finals. And with the finals taking place just a few hours after the initial semi-rounds, I feel that the general stamina or warm-up periods for each skater can play a huge factor in this regard. The same thing happened before in Paris at the first stop, and similar consequences can be seen here. However, as Haisa Leal's performance goes, she was the only skater in the women's final to actually do better than she did in the semis, having jumped up from a 78.9 landing rate to a 95 with only 1 bail across her 19 landed tricks. Compared to that of her fellow skaters battling with their single tricks, Chloe Cavell was the only one that landed a 4-score minimum and was close enough to her lead. However, her line was the only thing that held her down from reaching that top spot, as she would have needed to avoid bailing at all and land 2 9.1s to replace her lowest scores, which is just not all that possible, even for the men's skaters, making Haisa's win truly undeniable given the overall scoring compared to her peers. Whereas the women's half of the contest was clearly dominated by Haisa Leal's exceptional trick selection on the down rail, the men's side was really just a toss-up on the last few tricks with just who was going to take the top spot. With both Najee Houston and Yuta Horigome not being present in the final 6, there was definitely a lot more tension amongst the men's division as the podium was a bit more guaranteed this time around. Whether due to the high tension in the air or sheer amount of luck from the National Zaw Day, Braden Hoban was fortunate enough to not bail and snag a higher scoring 45-second line this time around, which really helped him in the long run as he was only able to get 3 single tricks this time, as compared to semis where Braden and Felipe were the only skaters to land 5 single tricks in a row. Had Braden fell once again in his 45-second lines for the finals, he would have been put in a much tougher spot for the single trick section, as we saw with both Giovanni Viana and Gustavo Ribeiro. With only 1 bail in the semis on a single trick, Giovanni had a good track record going into the finals that was unfortunately tossed up on his line section. Having bailed out consecutively on his runs, he was stuck with a 6.7 that weighed him down in the final score for the top spot. And if you want to get rid of that low scoring line, you absolutely cannot afford to bail more than 1 trick in the single section, which was unfortunately what happened to both Giovanni and Gustavo Ribeiro. With Gustavo, however, he had an unfortunate fate of not only having the highest line score of the night, a 9.1 across both men's and women's semis and finals, but was just not able to secure a 4th final scoring trick in his single section. In hindsight, all he needed was an 8.6 to take the first place on the last trick, of which was more than possible with a far easier trick than that of a kickflip no-slide heel out. However, that would just leave Braden with a shot at another kickflip frontside blunt, and based off scoring, it doesn't appear they give a deduction for tricks done in the finals that were performed in the semis, and with an average 81% accuracy across both rounds, it's fair to say that under pressure, Braden could still have won the crown, even with his back up against the wall. Whereas with the women's final being literally the exact same 6 finalists from Paris a few months ago, it was definitely interesting to see a few more unfamiliar faces in the men's final round, with Gustavo Ribeiro and Giovanni Viana being the only 2 skaters from the last SLS finals in Paris, leaving us some notable finalist names like Chris Jocelyn and our winner Braden Hoban. Whereas it's usually a toss-up between Chloe Cavell and Haisa Leal for the finals in the women's section, it was definitely a bit skeptical for most viewers at home for Braden to win in San Diego. especially considering that Aurelien Gerard took first last time in his own home country, and Giovanni Vianna taking last year's crown in the same fashion. And the ongoing trend of hometown winners appears to be a bit of a fishy coincidence for most people in the comments. Whether this is intentionally rigged or not is honestly hard to say with 100% confidence and no evidence, but I will say based off Braden's performance in the semis, it's clear to see that all he really needed was to land his 45-second run to add to his single trick destruction. With a total score of 49.9, it's hard to say it's not surprising he performed just as well in the finals, especially keeping in mind he's more than well adjusted to the San Diego area. A few hours for break didn't seem to mess with him as much as it did for other fellow skaters, having secured his final score by his third trick without ever needing to defend his top spot. As much as people want to say this win was rigged or the judges overscored, when you look at the numbers to the whole event, it's hard to dismiss that Braden had the overall best performance for both semis and finals, especially when looking back on his first Apex stop results. It's not really shocking he had something to prove, given his poor performance on the Hollywood 9 stair. As mentioned previously, his win was more based on the luck of another skater's bail, rather than a definitive defense on the last trick, similar to what we usually see in SLS, as very rarely is a winner purely determined by landing their last trick, but rather is based off the current podium holder narrowly avoiding a close call knockout from another skater, which I feel really does capture just how serious that last trick moment can be. As for this year so far, every winner has avoided that second place medal by the skin of their teeth from another skater's tension-filled bail. Speaking of bails, this stop had a whopping 168 bails across all men and women rounds. Compared with the 190 bails at Paris 2024, this stop was a lot less of a bail fest this time around, with only one round in the entire event being an entire wipeout for all skaters. This wraps up our third stop with SLS this year, with 2 more Apex stops following in May and August, with a brief gap through the summer to allow for Olympic street events to take place, so hopefully our next Apex stop is a bit more creative than the last one, but only time will tell. Hope y'all appreciated my insights and opinions, and thanks for watching and stay pushing.
People are gonna think you're crazy! You don't have nothing but lint in the corner of your pockets. You're out here talking about living your dream. And people laughing at you. And they're doubting you. It takes guts, ladies and gentlemen. But let me tell you, I believe in revenge like Frank Sinatra. He said the best revenge is massive success.